today, you got the B team. I was planning on having I had Purina feed sales rep was supposed to be here, and he had to back out because he was out of town on business. I had to take a last minute business trip, and then I was going to have a vet here also, and got backed out on that too. So you get me, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm the B team on these particular topics. What we're going to start off with is general goat health. Again, we're going to do the same thing like we did last time. The slideshow presentation I'm going to email out, or well, my wife will email out to you guys so that you can go back over this. I know it's a lot of information and it's really hard to catch it all at one time when somebody's talking. Kids, if at any point you have a question, parents too, on what I'm talking about, by all means, flag me down and we'll talk about it. It's good for everybody to hear the questions. So we'll go ahead and get started. So Noah, you might go on the next slide. So general goat health. We're going to be talking about preventative health care, so biosecurity, vaccination, parasite, good nutrition, hoof care, and predator control. And then we're going to be talking about common health problems, so parasites, digestive, respiratory. We're not really going to get into like the reproductive stuff. Most people here probably aren't running their own herds. If you are, or you're thinking about doing so and have more questions, by all means afterwards you can ask and I'll tell you whatever I know. And then also skin issues, hoof related and wasting disease. Right? Okay, so note to self. First thing, if you have a goat, okay, make sure there are 2 thermometers in your house. Okay, one that you use for the goat, the other one you use for yourself. Because if you get them mixed up, it's slightly awkward, isn't it, Evan? Okay, so here's some information that you need to know. You need to know what a normal temperature is. 102 to 104 is normal. Normally we would think, oh my gosh, the thing has a fever. That's just what their average temperature is. Their heart rate is 60 to 90 beats per minute. Ruminations is not necessarily something I've ever had to check. I mean, I know when we've had to go to the vet or whatever, they'll look for that. Respiratory rate should be 15 to 30 breaths per minute. The cell volume, that's not something we're going to really deal with. But I don't know how you pronounce this, the FOMACHA score. That's something I have used, and I'll show you how to do that. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we really need to start off with what normal behavior is. So things that goats should normally be doing. They should have their heads up, they should have their ears up, tail up, bright-eyed, healthy hair coat. I mean, it should feel nice and soft, and if it's really coarse and rough, you may have something going on. They should have a good appetite, so they should be cleaning up their feed. They should be chewing their cud if they're laying down resting, and goats are naturally very curious animals. They check everything out. So if you have a goat that's not doing that, you may have an issue. They have a very agile, normal gait, so if you see one limping or carrying a leg, or that needs immediate attention. It's something you need to look for. And they also keep up with the herd. Goats are a herd animal. If you see one going off on its own, there's usually a reason it's going off on its own. If you've ever kidded out, that's usually a pretty good sign that one's getting ready to go into labor because they're going off by themselves. It's also a very good sign that one is sick and depressed, and so that's something we want to keep an eye on. Kids, when you're going out to the barn and you're feeding every day, it's very, very important that you really, really look at your animals. There's a difference between walking up and throwing some feed in and pouring in some water and then walking back to the house versus actually taking a minute or two to really actually look at the animal and see what's going on. There's a lot of things that get skipped when you're in a rush, and there's a lot of telltale signs that your life is much easier if you catch it early. If you catch it late, it's a lot harder and it can lead to death. We've managed to kill 2 of them in our house this year since we kidded out, so it's very easy to do. Go ahead to the next slide. So preventative health care, that's just doing things to make sure that we're not encouraging any kind of disease or something within our herd. So Biosecurity, a vaccination program, make sure that we're up to date on our vaccines. Parasite control, good nutrition is part of that. Predator management and hoof care. Go ahead, the next one. So it's good to start with healthy stock. I mean, if the animal that you bring home was sick when you bought it, it's probably not going to get, I mean, when you transport it to your house, that's going to be more stress on it. It's going to get sicker. So, start with something healthy. Buy from reputable breeders. Buy from somebody who's not going to sell you one that's just about ready to die. And then isolate animals for 30 days. When you bring something in new, and even if a breeder is 100% honest and the animal looks really good, that doesn't mean that they aren't already infected with something, and within a week to 10 days or so, they may break out with something. That doesn't mean that a breeder did anything wrong or that you did anything wrong. It's just life, right? So it's important that when we bring in something new that we isolate it from everything else, for a quarantine period. They typically suggest 30 days. That gives you enough time for anything that they might have had to break out, and if they don't break out anything, they don't have anything, and therefore we can put them in with our normal herd. And then maintaining a closed herd, which is really trying to figure out what they were talking about there, and I think it kind of explains it in the next slide. So, and I'm saying don't mix your goats with other goats or sheep. What they mean by that is other people's. So not necessarily like if you have sheep and goats at your house that they can't mix, but that don't mix them with everybody else's stuff. It's just like going to Disney World when it's really busy in flu season. It's a great time to get the flu, right? So it's the same thing with our animals. We try to keep some separation between us and other people's livestock so that we're not mixing diseases. Don't loan your goats out and send them to somebody else's barn and bring them right back in. Every time you do that, you basically really should go through that 30-day quarantine period. So something to consider there. Don't board other people's goats to where you're bringing in stuff that, pathogens or bacteria or viruses that may be in someone else's barn that you're introducing into your own. Don't loan equipment. So this is a really big deal when it comes to things like fungus. Because fungus is very easily transmittable. We're going to be talking about fungus here in a bit. It is something that if you own goats, you will battle, and it is a massive pain. If you loan your clippers out and somebody clips and they have fungus and you don't disinfect your stuff, and then you clip your animals, and next thing you know, you got it. So, and once you get it, it can get you kicked out of the show. If they can see that you have it, then they may not let you show in that show. So. Skin care is a really big deal, and especially with animals that have hair, finding it in time can be really hard. So there's a lot of preventative maintenance things that you can do to help that out. Control cat or dog, cat, rodent, fly, and bird populations. So, within your barn, flies are obviously an issue. I was like a fly killing machine last year, like my tower was in the thousands. So anything that's going to give you the ability to transmit fluids or skin cells, or anything to other animals, we want to try to limit, obviously. That will kind of make sense. So go ahead to the next slide. CDT. CDT is something that when you purchase your animals or with your breeder, you want to ask that question. You want to know if they've been vaccinated or not. If you have animals that you're keeping over a year, they need to be vaccinated once a year. Basically what CD or C and D is, it's explaining it up there. It's a bad type of bacteria that gets in the rumen, and if it multiplies too much, it can actually start causing a lot of acidity in the stomach, and then the animal stops eating. It can eventually lead to death. And CD is even more prolific when you push a lot of grain. As these animals are they're foragers, so normally what they're eating is brush and leaves and they don't even really like grass all that much. So when we're trying to beef them up and make them meaty animals, a lot of times we're pushing a lot of grain to try to turn them into a bodybuilder and to get a lot of mass, and that very well can lead to this. So it's very important that you have that available, or that you've done that, because if you haven't, you're going to face that problem. So go ahead and go to the next one. This talks about vaccinating on does. Before they kid out, they're supposed to get vaccinated, 1 to 2 months prior. 2 shots are necessary the first time an animal is vaccinated. And then, so these are the does before they have any kids. And then when they have kids, vaccinated approximately 8 to 12 weeks of age. So then they get another booster shot. So technically the kids are kind of getting 2 shots. They're getting one when you're giving it to the doe before they kid out, and then they're getting the booster shot later. If they've never had that, you're buying an animal from a herd, go ahead and give 2 shots. Rule of thumb, you're not going to kill one by giving them the CD vaccine or CDT vaccine. If you don't know, pretend like they've never had it and just start over. Okay, that's your best rule of thumb. So if your breeder can't tell you, or you can't get a hold of them, they won't return a phone call, whatever, just go ahead and treat them like they never had it and start from the beginning. Okay. Vaccinate early if dams were not vaccinated. Use tetanus antitoxin at the same time of castration or debudding if dam was not vaccinated. So in CDT, the last part of that is tetanus, and if they've already gotten their vaccine, so they're ready, they've already had tetanus shots. If they have not had tetanus shots, you definitely need to do that before you do any castrating or weaning. So go ahead and go to the next one. Other possible vaccinations, 7 and 8 way, however you pronounce that, clostridial. The CL, I don't know how to pronounce that one either, but everybody just calls it CL. Sore mouth, pneumonia, foot rot, rabies, autogenous. We do not give any of these other vaccinations. In like CL is a prime example. Talk to people. I've heard both ways, and this is both from vets and not, and breeders. If you give the CL, vaccine, you actually very well could introduce CL into your herd. So some people who have given CL vaccines have actually seen an increase in the number of CL cysts that happen. Okay, so a lot of breeders I talk to, and even veterinarians, this is coming straight from a veterinarian, that it's really not worth doing the vaccine because you could make your problem worse instead of better. CL is a type of cyst that they'll get in I believe it's in the lymph node. They'll get them underneath their jaw, right behind their front arm. So any place that glands are at, they can begin to pop up. If you get a CL cyst and that cyst is not healed, you can't bring it to the fair because it's very contagious and can get other animals. We have seen CL cysts before. I've got a doe at home that happened. The cyst ruptured, it healed up. She went to show after all the hair grew back. And I mean, once it happens, it looks worse than really what it is. It will heal up. It's not going to kill anything. The only time the CL can be deadly is if those cysts begin to appear in internal organs. That's where it can have an issue. If you see them on the outside, that's normally not a problem. It's the ones that you can't see that are the problem. Go on to the next one.
Bosie's not one then, for selenium. Is that because this is from California and they're not selenium?
Yeah, that is a great point. I'm pretty sure that is probably 100% right. And so they're gonna talk about selenium at some point, but Bosie is a great. You have to get Bosie from a veterinarian. It's a selenium shot that you can give to help if, and in this area, like we're feeding a lot of grass hay and stuff, we may not have enough selenium in the hay and stuff in the feed that we're giving, so we want to make sure that we got enough.
We do it that one thoroughly with our CDT and pregnant does.
Yes.
Before kidding.
Before kidding out, because you get wobbly leg syndrome and stuff like that, and we will definitely be talking about that. So things that we can do in a parasite program. So here we're talking about internal parasites, worms. Don't overstock pastures and pens. Before I explain this for you kids, I want you to understand how these parasites are transmitted. The way they are transmitted is that eggs are inside inside of the little goat turds that come out, right? And those hit the ground, and when they hit the ground, those eggs can come in contact with grass or hay or whatever. And then when the animal eats that grass or hay, those eggs are ingested back into their system, and those eggs hatch and create worms, which then create eggs that then pass out. So it's a cycle, right? A few of the things that we can do to stop that cycle, one is don't feed them on the ground. You know, if you see that there is any feces in their feed, get it out of there, because that's how it gets transmitted. So if we can keep them from ingesting anything that their feces is touched, that alone is going to drop the amount of worms that we have way down, okay? So we can also treat in other ways. So don't overstock pastures and pens, which makes sense. The less that we cram them in there and then we have more fecal matter on the ground and all that, the better off we're going to be. Don't overgraze. So don't make it to where, you know, the grass is getting so short that their mouths are coming in contact with the dirt and the feces that's on the ground. Rest pastures sufficiently. So give them enough time. I believe it's 90 days is the lifespan on the eggs. You might want to Google me on that. Like I said, I am the bee team here. Let's see. Enable browsing. Practice selective deworming. Not prolific deworming. So what they're saying there is deciding. So there's studies done about doing fecal egg counts, so you can actually have a vet do this where they'll take the fecal matter and they'll count how many eggs are in it. Some animals are more prone, and just within the boar breed, some animals are going to be more prone to worms. So they're saying that don't necessarily deworm everything, just deworm the ones that are the worst, and that'll actually make your whole herd become more healthy, or cull or get rid of the animals that are. You know, in our situation, guys, you're carrying an animal for a year. These things that we're talking about are things that, you know, if you were going to try to raise meat goats and have a herd for multiple years, you really would want to consider. But when we're just talking one that we're buying, we're going to the show and then we're selling, there's not enough time span to get that worried about this. Administer drugs properly. Determine which drugs work on your farm. Select goats which are more resistant to internal parasites. Practice good sanitation, so you know, wash your hands so you're not the one doing it, and then use coccidiostats. Coccidiostats are drugs that will kill internal parasites. You can't have them put in your feed. You can talk with your vet about that. Going backwards here, determine which drugs work for you on your farm. What we do is when we get our animals in, they will get dewormed. We typically use like Safeguard, Ivomec, Prohibit. Safeguard's the one that most parasites are immune to these days. So be careful if you go with Safeguard. Now we still do use it, but we will usually start off with Ivomec, Prohibit, and then when we go to do our next deworming, we will switch drugs. And the reason we'll do that is so that we kill all the animals or all the parasites that are, you know, that one can kill, and if there are any immune to that particular drug, when we do it the next time, we should be able to clean those out too. The other thing is that if you have, if you really think you do have a worm problem, you're not doing it just as a preventative precaution, but you actually think you have a worm problem, you need to look at what the egg cycle is on that day, or on those. Normally it's 14 to 19 days. So at that time, if you worm now, you'll kill everything that's alive. The eggs are still sitting there. Within 14 to 19 days, those eggs are going to hatch. So therefore, we want to go ahead and do it again so that we're getting rid of those at the same time. But I only necessarily recommend that if you really think you have a worm problem. And we'll talk about how you can tell if you do or not. Go on to the next one. Good nutrition and feed management. Feed balanced rations. Okay, so feed, guys, there's four places to get feed of. New Ross Grain's a good one. Timmons Feed is a really good one. Fedora over in Whitestown. I'm forgetting the third one down. Limhurst, thank you. Those are all great places to get feed, and there's all kinds of brands. Show Right, Show Feeds, Umbarger, Jacoby's, Kent has goat feed. So you really can pick about whatever you want there, but you want something that's made for goats and it's a balanced feed, so that when you're feeding that feed, it has the right mixture of feed in it. You know, you can, and we'll go through a little bit of this, but in the feeding section, but you don't have to get crazy on trying to mix everything yourself and create your own feed. A lot of that's already done for you. Feed according to production cycle and growth stage. What they're talking about here is, you know, if you're going to feed different with little wethers that you're bringing in versus those that are getting ready to get out, you're going to feed them considerably different. There's a chart in here that kind of shows you, or any other presentation that will show you some of that. Separate animals according to their nutritional needs. Supplement pasture and forage when necessary and economical. Provide free choice goat minerals. Make feed changes gradual. This is a big one. Don't make massive changes really fast. It's very hard on their stomachs because they get used to digesting a certain way and they're a creature habit. And then good feeder design so you're not wasting feed. Go ahead to the next one. Common health problems, internal parasites, digestive, nutritional, respiratory complex, reproductive, hoof, skin, and chronic. We'll cover those. Primary health problem affecting small ruminants. So we're talking about worms here. It's normal for goats to have some parasites. That is 100% true. You're not going to eradicate them and make it to where they never have any effort. That's not going to happen. What we want to do is control it, okay? So go on to the next one. I'm sorry, back up. Goal is to control, not eradicate. Due to long-term overuse and misuse, parasites have developed resistance to some of these. So Ivermectin, like I said, right now, Safeguard is probably the one that they're the most resistant to. Picture of one of the parasites. Roundworms, you have barber pole worms, a couple I can't pronounce, lungworms, tapeworms, liver flukes, and coccidia. Go to the next slide. Here's where we're talking about the FOMACHA, I think that's how you say it, system. It's a way to check and see how much of a parasitic load you have on your animal. You can order these cards online, you can buy them, they're not real expensive, $5 to $10, right? And it has a scale up here, you know, from pink to white. And basically, when we have a lot of parasites, the animals will become anemic, and when they do, the color of their eyelids are going to change. When they're not anemic, it's going to be very pink. When they have a lot of worms and stuff, it's going to almost turn white. And we can use that chart and look at their eyelids and tell whether they're going to need wormed or not. If you do me a favor and back up a slide, when you look at this one, kids, what do you think? Does this one look like it needs to be wormed? Yeah, it does. That's awful white, right? It's very, very white. So that's telling us that that animal's becoming anemic and that we really need to treat for parasites pretty bad. Let's go on to the next slide. And so the idea being 3 is what we would consider good. 1, 2, or 3, sure, we'd love to have 1, but sometimes it's just not going to happen. If we see anything in the 4 to 5 range, we need to treat. Go ahead to the next one. Digestive, nutritional, and metabolic. Scours. 2 types of scours, infectious, non-infectious. Intertoxemia, urinary calculi, acidiosis, bloat. Boy, that's a long word, I'm not going to say it. And then white muscle disease, floppy kid syndrome, pregnancy toxemia, milk fever, poisonous plants. Those are all things that can either kill your goat or cause your goat not to grow very well. Okay? Go to the next one. So scours, infectious, bacterial, viral, protozoal. You know, if it's a virus, it's probably going to have to run its course. If it's a bacteria, we can treat that with a vet, right? Non-infectious parasites do nutritional and stress. Nutritional is caused by us changing their diet too fast, giving them something that we've never fed them before and feeding too much of it too rapidly and causing them to go in a downward spiral. Stress can do it. I mean, I've been at the state fair where, really trying to hydrate goats, and they had one on a stand and it coughed and it shot poop out like 15 feet, hit a lady that was walking, in a nice dress. It was kind of funny. I laughed a little.
It wasn't me.
So, and that, realistically, that's from the stress of being at the show and all the people around it and it being hot and a different environment. I mean, all those things can cause that. So, I mean, you really do have to kind of baby these things a little bit and think about it. So anytime we see scours, we want to deal with that immediately. And by immediately, I mean like immediately. You have to think about you're trying to feed these animals and bulk them up. And when you get the scours, they lose water weight really, really fast, and none of that feed is getting converted into any kind of muscle. So you're really, if you let it go for 2 days, you're realistically losing 3 or 4 days of feed production because of it. So when you see one has it, try to get it stopped. As far as drugs, I'm not a vet, so I'm not going to sit up here and give you all the vet stuff. I will tell you this with goats. A lot of drugs that are out there that you can use or buy off the shelf are not always rated for the use of goats. A big primary part of that is for them to get that certification is massively expensive. And there's not a lot of goats in the United States, so therefore it's not all that economical for them to go through the whole testing process. So the best thing that I can tell you is get a very good relationship with a vet and talk with a vet. The other thing is be careful what vets you get. I'm not discrediting any vet, but some of them don't really know jack squat about goats because there's just not a lot of them out there. I know that Devin here in town is very good, and there is a vet in New Ross that we've taken goats to her before. She is very good also. So there's 2 suggestions of people that you can get a hold of. And I mean, I know you don't need your vet right now, but I guarantee you do this long enough, you're going to need one. So it's probably a better idea to get a relationship with them before you need them, instead of when you're calling them at like 8 o'clock at night with a massive problem and they have no idea who you are. Okay. So I highly suggest that you talk to a vet about some of this stuff. Go to the next one. Nutritional disorders. So intertoxemia can be caused by just change in diet. So again, when we feed and we change feed or we do something different, we want to step the animal into it. We don't want to just completely change their ration overnight. Sidiosis, we were talking about that with CD. That's what happens when we get too much acid in their stomachs, and it can be a big problem. White muscle disease, we were talking about, there's a shortage of vitamin E and selenium. When you see that, they're going to get really wobbly. Okay, if you see your goat get wobbly, where it looks like it's either had a little too much to drink, or it's just doesn't seem right and it's rocking, or you see its head doing these kind of things, you need to start treating it really, really quickly. And I can tell you that one from experience. Bloat. This is something frothy, pasture related. When animals eat a lot of hay, it creates a lot of extra gas because there's bacteria that's breaking that hay down, and then that'll actually cause their stomachs to expand. In breeding stock animals, it's no big deal. We actually kind of prefer that, right? In market animals, we really want to be a little more slender, so that's something that you need to pay attention to. There's ways of treating bloat. Mineral oil is one. You can use Pepto-Bismol is another one. Those are all things you can do to help keep their stomachs. And when they get bloated, they don't eat near as well. I mean, you have to kind of think about it like yourself. Like, you've ate a whole bunch of chili and, your stomach's just all, you really don't want to eat anything else. So when they get really bloated, we want to pay attention to that. Polio, which is a thiamine deficiency, it's usually grain related. This is one we've got really good experience with because we've been dealing with this one this year on a buck that we have that's getting wobbly and it's really a pain. Thiamine is a vitamin B, or vitamin B. I highly suggest with your animals that you give them vitamin B at least once a month, if not 2 weeks. You can do it orally through the mouth. It does multiple things. It helps increase their appetite. It increases their immune system to help keep them healthy. And if you have one that's having trouble creating enough vitamin B on their own, it's definitely going to be a good thing for them. Floppy kid syndrome typically affects kids 3 to 10 days after age. I'm not really going to cover that one because if you're buying your animals, they're already past that point anyway. But if you want to talk about it later, we will. Urinary calculi is a big one. You're not normally going to run into that with does. What urinary calculi is basically a kidney stone in general terms. And with the does, they're able to pass those without having a problem. But in your wethers, it's a massively big deal because if one of those gets stuck and they cannot go to the bathroom, it can be fatal and it can kill them. Typically, you will see this if you start to get really crazy on your feed and you start to really hammer these things with a lot of protein, especially on wethers, you are going to run into calculi problems. The way you combat that is use ammonium chloride. Ammonium chloride will help change the pH level in their urine and dissolve those stones. If you see one, I mean, and the kids, this is what I'm talking about when you go out and watch these things or feed these things. I mean, when they relieve themselves, it's important that you actually watch that. I know it sounds weird to stand there and watch a goat pee, but it's a pretty big deal because if they're really struggling or it's a really small stream or something like that, it's great to go ahead and get some ammonium chloride in them now before they get, because once it gets stuck, it's really hard to come back from. And if you have bucks and stuff, it can cause some major reproductive problems. So, go ahead to the next one. Respiratory. You have an infectious like bacterial pneumonia, non-infectious, dust, poor ventilation, nasal bots. I don't know anything about that one, so you have to Google that one on your own. Lungworms and stress, and then secondary respiratory problems. Dust and poor ventilation is a big one. You know, when it gets really dry in the summer, and if you're using really fine shavings, and you've got goats that are coughing a lot, it's probably not necessarily a respiratory problem. It's the dust in your shavings. We typically like to use like fine shavings at the bottom, and then we'll put bigger, thicker shavings on top. The fine shavings help clear or help soak up any kind of urine, and then the bigger shavings stay on top and kind of keep the dust down. That's how we like to do it, but you can try anything else you want. If you notice one that is coughing pretty heavily, especially early in the season, get with your vet pretty quick because you don't want to develop pneumonia. It can be fatal. So if you have one that's got a cough that's just not going away and you don't have any of these other problems, get on the phone with the vet. A shot of Dex will normally take care of it. It's very cheap and it doesn't take long, but if you don't do it, it can cause death. Hoof rot. So, and there's two types. There's infectious, there's two different bacteria. It's got a really, really nasty odor to it, and it is contagious compared to other animals. So there's things that you can use to treat that. Copper tox is one. What's the fungus fighter is another that we've used. It could get really, and this is where if you see something limping, you really want to look at the bottom of your foot and try to find out what it is. The other one is just foot scald, and a lot of times foot scald will just come from, you know, if you have them in an area that's really damp and their feet are not really drying out. And if you think about it, goats normally are mountainous animals that climb on rocks, and so muddy, dirty ground is not necessarily what they're designed for, and it can cause rot. It's really not that hard to treat typically, especially the earlier you catch it, but if you see something limping around not walking right, I mean, you need to check it out. Go to the next one. Skin. This one's kind of gross. External parasites, mice, ticks, lice, and nose spots. You will, I guarantee you're going to go through this at some point. We typically preventively use Ultra Boss once a month just to try to make sure that we get rid of them. Now that will get rid of parasites, that will not get rid of funguses, okay? So fungus is a whole nother deal, so we got to do some different things for that. Sore mouth is a virus. There's no getting rid of it. Sore mouth, the way it is spread is when the scabs on the mouth fall off. If it goes into the feed and another animal eats that scab, they will normally end up with sore mouth. It's pretty prevalent in this area. When they get it, I mean, it's like ulcers in their mouth, and they'll normally kind of go off feed a little bit, because I mean, who wants to eat a granola bar when we got a big old canker sore in their mouth? And that's kind of what they're dealing with. There's really no treatment for it other than to let it run its course and finish up. It is something that if you have it, you don't want to take that animal to show. Most animals that we've ever seen get it, they usually get it very shortly after we bring them into the barn, and usually within a couple weeks it'll heal up and go away and be done. So that is something that you want to watch out for. If you have one like that, make sure that you separate it from everybody else. It's got its own feed pan till it's all dried up and cleared up and done, so you're not getting it to the other animals. Go to the next one. Reproductive. We can go on past that. We don't need that. Chronic wasting disease. So scraby tags. That's in there in their ear to track. Here's actually a CL cyst. So that's what that looks like if you happen to ever get one. Again, the other ones that I've seen have been behind the front shoulder. Other than that, John's disease, you can look that up if you want. There's really not been any studies done in goats in the United States, but every other breed of animal they've ever checked, it does exist. It is a bacteria that they get. It can cause them to lose weight really quickly and die. There's really not anything that you can particularly do at this point to stop that if that happens to you. I've not heard of a case of it in the area, and there's really no research that's been done with it. On the next one. One more. So housing, we'll talk a little bit about that because I mean it is part of goat health. One of the things that we do in our barn, and this was suggested to me, and it makes the most sense. One of the things you have to understand about making these animals grow is that we're trying to control or measure everything that's going in them and everything that's coming out of them. If we have 4 or 5 animals and we take them in and just open them up into a pen and we dump a bunch of feed in, we're not necessarily going to know if one of them quits eating. Well, we won't know because the rest of them are going to eat up whatever that one did eat, right? So you can't really tell how much feed is going into the animal, okay? The other part of it is we can't really see any droppings after the fact to see how that's going, how food's moving through them. So with ours, the ones that we're showing, we do have a pin in the back that's got a lot of goats in it, but the animals that we're actually trying to show are in individual pens with individual feeders, okay? So that we immediately know day to day if one goes off feed. I mean, if we've been feeding 2 pounds a day and we come the next day and it looks like there's about 2.5 pounds, somebody's not feeling good, and it generates the question, why is that goat not feeling good? If we had them all, if we put 6 of them in a pen and we fed 12 pounds of feed and we come back and there's just a 0.5 pound in there, we don't really know that anybody's stopped eating. And one of the other goats could very well have gobbled that right up. I mean, there's always a big eater in the group, and there's always ones in the group that don't eat as much. So I do encourage you to try to split them off so that you can see what's happening. Just things that they're talking about here facility-wise. Now they're talking more about kidding. Go on. Keep going. Go back to hoof trimming. Okay, so hoof trimming we talked a little bit about last time. I mean, here are, again, there's YouTube videos on this. Here are hoofing shears, or trimming shears. There's all different kinds. I mean, you can even use some of the pruning shears that they have just at the hardware store will work just fine. But it is important that you take care of their feet, because one of the things that we judge are how they walk, right? And what their structure looks like. And if those feet are grown in or grown out, it's going to make them walk funny. And if they walk funny, it's going to hurt you in the showroom. So it is important you stay on. Normally, if you're showing them very much, you can trim them once a month, or if you're not showing them once a month's probably pretty good. If you're showing them a lot, I mean, we'll almost trim every week if we're going to show about every week. But you probably really need to try to do it once a month. Go on to, I think that's it for this topic. I'll take a moment to stop. Does anybody have any questions? In full disclosure, I'm not a vet. I'm just a guy who's been doing it for a little while, and I haven't even been doing it all that long. So I'm not saying I think I gave you pretty good information here, but by all means, check your vet. Don't go off my word. But does anybody have any questions on anything that we've talked about here at all?
How does the goat break down the copper that's in the feed?
The copper that's in the feed?
Yeah, I ran into this with our goats, that, we've got sheep also, and, rather than having, feeds to get, because the copper will kill the lamb.
Yes.
Now,
Yep.
after talking to Timmons, they said it's okay that the goat eats
Yes.
sheep feed, but not vice versa.
Yes, and that is one thing. If you do have sheep and goats together, you cannot let your sheep eat your goat feed. If that happens, they will die. And that has to do with the copper. I wish I had a really smart answer for you, and I'm probably going to Google this when it's over, how they break the copper down, because I honestly don't know. And I don't know if it covers it in the slide. I didn't see it in there. But that's an interesting question. Actually,
Well, I guess what my real question is will it hurt us on the end game if the goat is not getting the copper, if we give it the lamb's feed? Is everything else is the same?
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I would say yes, it does, because they would not be putting, and I know you can give them too much copper, that too much copper can be bad for a goat also, but they are intentionally putting the copper in there. I'm assuming that it has something to do with how they synthesize protein and whatnot, but quite frankly, I'm not smart enough to know that one, but I bet I can probably find out for you. And that's an interesting question, because honestly, I hadn't thought about that one, but I will find out for you. Do you have any other questions? Okay, if not, Noah, can you go to the next PDF file that's down there, and that's on feed.